Hello, everybody. I am coming at you from Avala Spine Hospital in the New Orleans area. On Friday, I had my second spinal fusion, but I don't give up on y'all. And I wanted to talk to you about your upcoming essay and about some things that I mentioned in this week's discussion. So, the Shakespeare essay is built around using emotion and using the rhetorical devices in the modules to create that emotion. So certainly one thing I'm looking for as a teacher is that you show your understanding of how these devices work. And you may, if you wish, and I'd love to see it, for you to try some of them on your own, one or two, give it a run, right? 3 or 4, great, right? I'm not necessarily counting, but I do want to see that you can practice with them. And the devices are built around basic categories. What's the most effective way to ask a question? What's the most effective way to refute a counter argument? What's the most effective way to undermine your opponent's argument? And then there are other categories, and I've done some of that in the notes for you so that you can understand them better. But in the end, your essay is an essay, and your job is to prove who the better speaker is. And again, it doesn't matter if you think it's Brutus or if you think it's Antony. What matters is how you structure that argument and how you defend your claims and your thesis. So with regard to the claims, that's something that many of you missed in the first essay. That's not uncommon because you're shifting your mindset from explanatory writing to argumentative writing. And you do have to think of the body paragraphs as mini arguments or counter arguments when you're writing an argument. You don't want just to say Brutus does a good job, Antony does a good job. That's not an argument, right? You have to prove that Brutus is better than Antony or Antony is better than Brutus. And that would be your thesis. Brutus is the best speaker or Antony is the best speaker. And then the body paragraphs are built around specific claims, argumentative positions that you establish and that you defend in that paragraph. So the paragraph becomes a mini argument. So you might say, Antony is a better speaker than Brutus because he uses emotion better to sway the crowd. And then you find examples of where he does that. You quote those in your essay. Then you analyze what he's doing with these emotional devices and what the effect is on the crowd. And you reassert that this makes him the better speaker than Brutus. And that's the way you structure an argument in general, right? But you have to have that claim specifically written in there. You can't just say, Antony speaks well. That's not an argumentative point. Everybody's going to agree with you. That's an explanatory point. You're proving that he is better than Brutus at doing something, or that Brutus is better than Antony. So you come up with your own reasons. I'm not going to force feed them for you. You can look at the argument and the speeches and see what you believe. However, I just simply want to say that that claim has to be there. It has to be written out. A reason why one speaker is better than the other. Okay, it doesn't happen in every paragraph necessarily because sometimes you kind of intersperse them with counter arguments, but you have to think of it happening, right? Regardless of how you write it. So top of the paragraph, bottom of the paragraph, make it clear in those claim-based paragraphs. Another thing I want to talk to you about real quick is some of the points that I brought up in your discussion this week. It's a good idea to read some of the threads, especially when I respond, because I like to get into the fineries of writing. So I'm just going to share with you some comments I made to various students about the discussion this week, and hopefully they just help you understand the details of argumentative writing. Chelsea had a really strong essay, and she talked about a major flaw in her writing being, writing in 101 style, what I call explanatory writing. But that she went on to say that she's in the sciences, and in the sciences, that's what you do. So I want to just simply share my response with her to help you differentiate these different styles of writing that exist. Let's see, let me call it up here. So I wrote to her this morning, hey, I understand the learning curve with the new documentation style. So she uses APA a lot instead of MLA. But right now I wrote, I'm in an MS program, so I'm studying to be a clinical counselor right now. And I have to use APA, and it feels weird, right? I think some of the issue you feel about writing in 101, Chelsea, comes from your background in the sciences. That kind of writing tends to eliminate the personal voice, whereas here in the arts, right, in the humanities, we believe that you should develop your personal voice with all its character and personality as much as possible. From my perspective, science writing feels bloodless and cold, where argument should be especially live, vivacious, right? Got a lot of flow and just duende spirit to it. The more flair, the better, right? This just underlines how not all writing is done for the same purpose or audience. In the art, well, let the audience feel Chelsea as much as possible, or as much as you. We want to see boldness here. We do limit the I narrator. You're only supposed to use it when you give expert experience in the art. But we'd love for you to kind of take it in a new direction, go off on a tangent, and bring it back. And as long as you bring it back to the theme with all that wondering you do on the page, that's fine. Okay. And then, let's see, I also wrote to Barbara had an interesting comment. And so she said she looked at the list of top 20 errors, and she began some of her signal phrases with the word in. Right, and it creates problems. So that's on the list of top 20 errors. I write, don't begin a signal phrase when you introduce an author or a title or a quote or something like that. Don't use in. Now, is it wrong grammatically? No, of course not. Is it wrong stylistically? It is. So I just want to share with you what I wrote to Barbara. And it'll pop up here in a second. And I said, hey, Barbara, I'm glad you brought up the point about beginning a signal phrase with in. It's not wrong. It just creates the worst possible syntax. And syntax is word order. That's all it is, right? The best writing is the most simple. That's when you say subject, verb, object, like he hit him, right? You can't mistake that message. So this is the easiest way to develop clarity in your writing. You don't ever really want to separate the subject and verb. Those two things should be next to each other, and unless you're really adept at it. But even then, it's done sparingly, right? So a signal phrase can get really awkward if it starts with a preposition. Using SVO syntax, it should look something like this. The author writes, quote, and then you'd have the article title if you haven't stated it already here in the page number. Right? Writing this way is so much better, more clear than using a preposition to begin a sentence. It can really get messy or confusing if you write, in the article by Sandra Jones called blah, 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 it says, that's completely inefficient and sometimes hard to interpret. You'll be so much better off just by writing Jones writes and then giving the quote and then the title of the article. I shall put an end quote here on a page number. And that's the point of a citation. You don't want to interrupt the writing with that. So the citation takes the care of giving the reference information. You don't have to write that into the signal phrase. Just put it in parentheses so you're efficient with the way that you present the information. All right, let me share another thread or two that I did here. Jesus, yeah, I got a chance to work with Jesus on Zoom this week. It was really fun. We talked a lot about different things. And he brought up a point about using you. And let's see, we'll wait for this to pop up. You being YOU, right? So this is just really slow because I'm dealing with the hospital Wi-Fi. Give me a second here. Okay. So using you isn't wrong. It's just bad style. And in academic writing of any kind, and that's across the disciplines, even the sciences, you avoid it. So I wrote why. Okay. This style asks that we refer to the reader in the third person, he, she, right, etc. This makes the essay more objective. And make sure you don't limit your audience and limit your voice shifts, because if you write to you, the second person, it's almost inevitable that you switch to third, and you want to be consistent. The assumption is that anyone who picks up the essay should be able to read it and objectively be able to relate to it, right, because it has an objective stance. You just got to understand that. There's a little personal note for Jesus there, but so if you write, let's say you're doing an argument and it's like an abortion argument, and you say, well, when you're a woman and you're pregnant, well, you just cut out half your audience, right? You're assuming that the men can't relate to this, okay? And so if you stay objective and you talk about it in a broader term, right, you don't say to the reader, you are pregnant. You say, okay, if it's the case that a woman becomes pregnant, and that allows for the kind of hypothetical logical flow that you want. One final thing. I know the video here reached in 10 minutes, but I want to be real detailed. So Gavin wrote about some of the issues that he was looking up in his going through the top 20 errors, etc. And let's get this up again. I apologize. Here we go. Okay, and I really like Gavin's attention to detail, okay? And doing that really shows a growth mindset. If you go through the modules, if you revisit your work, if you're humble enough to go through my comments and be disciplined about it, you're going to grow. And, athletes do that, people who bounce back are good fighters. They do that, and it's a skill that I want you all to develop. So one of the things that's very detailed is the rule in American English that you put a comma or a period always, no matter what, inside quote marks. And that is true. But you see it differently all the time, because in Britain it's just the opposite. And here I explain where the rules came from. It came from the old typewriter days, and the people who saw typesetters created a rule that if it had one keystroke, like a comma or a period, it went inside, and two, like a semicolon or a colon, it went outside. And then question marks can go either way depending on what's said, right? Okay, so these little things are just reinforcements that you're writing standard American English, so follow the pattern. Not a biggie, but it just shows me that you're paying attention to detail. All right, time for me to lie down here. Got another day or two in here, but I'm thinking of you all, and I'm wishing you well on your next essay. I'll be back home next week if you want to Zoom with me. I look forward to working with you. Bye.